Ray Buckland, America's Bridge to Wicca. Because the interesting thing is that even though there have been a lot of documentations about various pagan groups starting and trying to start and all that, really much of the modern neo-pagan scene owes its existence and even its form to modern Wicca. I mean, really, because early on, we Wiccans tend to be loudmouths. We like to talk about things. And in the 50s and 60s, the main people you found who were calling themselves pagans were Wiccans. And yet the original British Wicca, even though it started filtering over here in books and various leaked forms here and there, really the first time Wicca came to the United States was in 1964, when a man named Raymond Buckland brought Gardnerian witchcraft to the United States and formed the first Gardnerian coven in the United States in Long Island, New York. The Long Island Coven. And in fact, that Long Island line, that initiatory line that started with Ray and Rosemary Buckland, it still exists today. In fact, one of the other speakers here at Starwood this year, Thorn Mooney, is a third-degree Gardnerian priestess in the Long Island line. She can trace her initiation back to Gerald Gardner through Ray and Rosemary Buckland. So that is who we're talking about here today, is Raymond Buckland, who passed away last year, last September. He passed away after having a few years of failing health. And really, I thought this year's Starwood would be a great time to take a look at Ray Buckland and really his legacy in not only the American pagan scene, but also in the spiritualist scene and in the New Age and occult scene in general. Ray Buckland was a prolific author who wrote on a lot of subjects. In fact, if you look at Ray's bibliography, you're like, oh my God, what did this guy not write about? But it was he was doing that type of thing for over 40 years, so you're going to build up a bibliography when you do. But starting off at the beginning, Raymond Buckland was born in 1934 on August 31st, and he was considered a mixed ethnicity child because his mother is regular white bread British lady, and his dad was full-blooded Romani, also known as a gypsy. Travelers, tinkers, those sorts of folks. As a matter of fact, Raymond Buckland's dad was the first Buckland to ever be born in a house. Everybody else from Ray's grandfather on all the way through the rest of his family line, these people all born, lived, and died on the road. Travelers, like so many Romani in Europe at the time. And so Ray was half-blooded Romani. And he particularly got into this heritage later in life. It's one of the things that drew him actually to the occult and the paranormal early on. Ray had this uncle. And you could say uncle in quotes because I'm not quite sure if he was actually a blood uncle or if he was one of those family friends who everybody says, oh, just call him Uncle George or something like that. But his uncle was from his dad's side of the family, and he was from the Romani side, and he had recently gotten into being a trance medium, doing seances and spirit communication and table tipping and that sort of thing. And Uncle George did a seance in Ray's home when he was 12 years old, and he was hooked. He was fascinated. The responses they got that night were really impressive, and it set young Raymond on a course towards studying all he could about the paranormal and the occult. Really something he would do for the rest of his life. He wound up going through the English school system. He wound up going to college. He went to a fairly posh affair. Ray, when he got out of schooling, wound up joining the Royal Air Force for a couple of years, and then he wound up working for British Airways. Now, he also used to do some screenwriting. There was a particular British comedian whose name escapes me, but Ray was his personal scriptwriter. The guy liked the way Ray put together his stuff for him. So Ray did a lot of screenwriting in his life. He started young, but then he went to work, like I said, for British Airways. Now, the advantage of British Airways is that allowed him to travel. Because even though he wasn't a pilot or a flight attendant or anything like that, still, when you worked for British Airways, you know, if you needed to get somewhere and there was a British Airways flight that had an empty seat, you could just hop on it for free if you were an employee, which really helped him when it came time to start looking at his other interests. And one of the things that happened was that his working for British Airways, he got stationed in the United States, working for British Airways in America. And it was after he moved to the U.S. that he ran across two books that would forever change his life. And that was The Witch Cult in Western Europe by Margaret Murray and Witchcraft Today by Gerald Gardner. And as a matter of fact, it's kind of funny. Ray Buckland was on my Facebook friends list pretty much from the time I got on Facebook. And he had a really big Facebook friends list. Okay, I am not special in any sort of way. I just got to him early before it filled up. And the fact that I met him about a half dozen times throughout his life, he did seem to remember. But he was also very good at remembering people's names and faces. That was another thing that really helped him in his life. But where was I going with that? Okay. But no, what it was is that, I put out a thing one time on my Facebook asking people, what was your first Wiccan or pagan book? And then after all these people coming in, a lot of people saying Cunningham, some people saying Buckland's Complete Book of Witchcraft. Then Ray Buckland himself pops up on my Facebook feed saying Witchcraft Today by Gerald Gardner. But, you know, Buckland was interested in this witchcraft stuff that he found in Gerald Gardner's book and in Margaret Murray's book. These ideas were fascinating to him. And so he started writing Gerald Gardner letters. Because in the days before the internet, we didn't tweet people. We, wrote out complete sentences on letters and mailed them.
Right.
And that's how a lot of people talked to Gerald Gardner back in the day. They'd send a letter to his publisher, and his publisher would forward it to his house. And Ray Buckland and Gerald Gardner corresponded for quite some time until Gardner decided that he wanted... Gardner was getting a lot of letters from the United States and people wanting to join a coven in the United States, and Gardner had no place to point people because all the covens at the time were in England. So eventually, after getting so many of these letters and after corresponding with Ray, Gerald told Ray, said, hey, bring your wife to Scotland, where my priestess is at, I'll be there, we'll get you guys initiated and elevated, and get you the Book of Shadows so you can go back to your little area of Long Island, New York, and actually start a Wiccan coven, which was, the tradition that would come to be known as the Gardnerians. And so they did that. Ray and Rosemary Buckland traveled to Scotland, to Perth, and they were Ray was initiated by Monique Wilson, Gardner's final high priestess. Lady Olwen is the name she was known as in the craft, and then eventually, after Ray was initiated and elevated, then he initiated and elevated his own wife, and they came back with the Gardnerian Book of Shadows and set up the first coven on Long Island. The coven didn't have a name; it was just the Witches' Coven, because it was the only one in North America at the time. Now again, you'll read...
It didn't need a name.
Yeah, it didn't need a name.
Coven.
It was a Witch's Coven. Now, of course, you'll read about people like, Oberon Zell was already doing Church of All Worlds by that point out in St. Louis. And there were a few other folks like Victor and Cora Anderson out in California were doing their fairy tradition. There were other people doing basically pagan magic that they called witchcraft or that sort of thing. Oberon wasn't so much doing that, but they were doing paganism out of Church of All Worlds. Oh, yeah. And which was eerily similar. As a matter of fact, Oberon will tell you that when they started reading all of Gerald Gardner's stuff, they're like, that's cool, we'll use this too. In addition to all this stuff over here, we'll use some of this stuff too. And so, with this first Long Island Coven, and it started bringing in people. It started getting people to third degree, hiving off new covens, which is the process of a new coven being formed by splitting off from the old one, and it just started to spread. And like I said, in Gardnerian Wicca, as well as in other forms of British traditional Wicca, pretty much any of the initiatory traditions within Wicca, there are different initiatory lines or lineages. Because really the way it goes, for anybody not familiar, is that in the way that Wicca used to be back before Scott Cunningham brought the solitary eclectic Reformation in the late 80s, the way you formed a new coven was that you joined a coven, you got initiated, you went through first, second, third degree, and after you went through third degree, you could then go off and form your own coven, and that's how new covens were formed. But you notice that it's a time-based process. It takes time. And so from this first little coven to other covens being formed and hiving off, it took time, and for a long time, most of the actual, what we would know as Wicca in the United States, was all in like a 3-county area in New York, and that was it. And of course things grew and evolved. Ray and Rosemary Buckland had that coven for a number of years. They brought Gardnerian Wicca here to the United States in 1964. That was the year that happened. And then around 1972, though, the Bucklands wound up getting divorced. Ray would be married 3 times during his life. The second one nobody really talks about because she didn't really last that long. But basically, Rosemary was the one who brought witchcraft with him back from Scotland, and then Tara Buckland was his final life partner when he passed away. But Ray and Rosemary Buckland divorced. They both decided to step down from their coven, from leadership. They handed off leadership to this group named Theos and Phoenix, Lady Theos. And let me tell you, there's a lot of instances in pagan history where people are like, wow, I wish I hadn't done that. This is one of the earlier ones in American pagan history. Because the thing is that Theos and Phoenix were kind of like their right hand. So it was natural to hand the coven off to this because they were a couple. They were an established pair-bonded couple. They were both third degrees. They were qualified. But Theos also had a bit of an ego about her. And this is a story that as of yet is unpublished, but I know it's true because Ray told me. One time when I was at the Canton Area Witches Ball, I asked him about this particular thing, and he told me the story behind it. Because one of the things that separates American Gardnerian witchcraft, especially the Long Island line, sets it apart from the British Gardnerian Wicca that was left behind from all the covens that hived off of Gerald Gardner's original coven, is that in the Long Island line, only a woman can cast a circle for an initiation. So if you have a high priest and a high priestess at the center of a coven, only the high priestess can cast the circle to initiate somebody. The high priest can't do it. Now, this was never a rule in the original British Wiccan covens. Gerald Gardner himself did a lot of initiations by himself. He would always do male to female, female to male, but when he found a woman he thought would make a really good witch, he'd go ahead and initiate her, and he'd do it by himself if he had no one else, so we know he was casting the damn circle to initiate. But Theos decided that what would happen was that first Ray and Rosemary stepped down, and since it was the first time, really the leaders of any coven in the US or England had ever actually stepped down, while the group remained intact, they thought it would be a good show to pledge loyalty and allegiance to the new high priest and priestess of the coven, to Phoenix and Theos. And so Ray Buckland swore an oath of fidelity to them, said he would abide by them as if they were his initiating priest and priestess, to set the example for the rest of the coven, to accept these new coven leaders. The old leaders say, no, these people are our leaders now as well. And after they did that, then Theos, she had a problem. She was worried that Ray was going to leave the coven, because he was going to leave the coven. He was moving away. He was moving out. He was getting divorced, leaving his job, getting the fuck out of Dodge. He was moving out. He was getting away from everything, but he wasn't moving that far. He was moving maybe 2 or 3 cities over, and Theos was afraid that he was going to go and form a new Gardnerian coven that would upstage hers. So she instituted the rule that only a priestess can cast a circle to initiate anyone. Well, Ray had just gotten divorced from his priestess, so he couldn't form a new Gardnerian coven because he had to abide by her rules because he had made an oath, and he always honored his oaths. So, and it's really funny too because Theos wound up telling priestesses downline from her saying, well, that's always what the rule has been. They just never told you that. But then some of these people later started contacting Gardnerian priestesses who had actually worked with Gerald Gardner, like Doreen Valiente and Patricia Crowther and Ray Bone and all these people. And when they'd say things like, only a priestess can cast a circle, these old line Gardnerian priestesses would say, really? That's new to us. We've never done it like that. Who told you that bullshit? Patricia Crowther, for one, really went on a tear. She was just like, oh my God, you people need to grow the hell up. I remember, I think was one of her phrases was grow the hell up. But Ray was kind of locked out of the tradition that he had brought to the United States. And he had also, to tell you the truth, when he saw some of the stuff that happened in the coven after they left, he started thinking, you know, maybe the whole hierarchical leader for life thing is a mistake with some people. It can work fine when you've got the right people, but some people should not be allowed to play with pagan groups or sharp objects. So Ray wound up leaving Gardnerian Wicca, and as a matter of fact, he decided, see, Gardnerian Wicca had always been very Celtic in origin, even though they used names like Pan and Aradia and all these non-Celtic names. You could tell that that was just their attempt at grasping at whatever pagan mythology that they are familiar with. Very Celtic in origin. Ray was always fascinated by Saxon influences. His mother is descended from Saxons. So he wound up researching the Saxons and came up with what he called Seax Wicca, or Saxon Wicca. And he wound up writing a book called The Tree, the complete book of Saxon witchcraft. And it really was the first system published. Right around the same time, I think Doreen Valiente's Witchcraft for Tomorrow was published right around the same time, if I'm not mistaken. Or at least in the U.S. it was published right around the same time. And both of these books broke from the Gardnerian norm by acknowledging that you could be a person who is alone and by yourself and could still do this system. You could be a solitary. The very first solitary system widely promulgated in the U.S. was promulgated by the same guy who originally promulgated the non-solitary system that people were all familiar with, the Gardnerian witchcraft. But he came out with The Tree. Now, one of the cool things, now, real quick plug, anytime you're passing through Cleveland, go through a neighborhood called Tremont, go to the Buckland Museum of Witchcraft and Magic in Cleveland, Ohio, in the Tremont neighborhood, because they've got so many cool things there. I'll get to the history of Ray's museum here in a minute, but one of the cool things they have in the Buckland Museum is there's a cover painting that they used for The Tree for years. It was this really cool painting of this male figure on one side of the tree and a female figure on the other side of this tree. And if you open the book up, so you can look at the back and front covers, you can see the whole painting. It was really cool. They've got the original painting up on the wall in the Buckland Museum, which is really, because that's it, and it's not big. It's like that by that. I mean, you know, it's like, it's funny because I've seen pictures of like Iron Maiden album covers, the original album art, and it's like 6 feet by 8 feet, and no, this one is like that by that. But and it's been reproduced so many times on so many editions of The Tree. I've got an edition with that cover. But it's just one of those really cool things. Yeah. But you know, once Ray established, you know, one of the things that happened before he did the Saxon Wicca, one of the things that Gerald Gardner had going in England was a museum of witchcraft and magic on the Isle of Man, very famous Gardner's Witchcraft Museum. Well, Buckland decided he was going to do a witchcraft museum in the United States. The original Buckland Museum was a small collection he kept on one shelf in his basement, and you could make an appointment to go see the handful of artifacts that he had at the time. But he just kept gathering more and more stuff, acquiring more and more cool stuff. Stuff like one of Sybil Leek's Athames. He has one of Aleister Crowley's magic wands. He's got, you know, he wound up getting one of Gerald Gardner's brooms, one of his original bezels. And all of these things are in the Buckland Museum to this day. But eventually he opened up the Buckland Museum of Witchcraft and Magic as its own entity, in its own house in Long Island. And then it wound up moving from there to another location. He had it open briefly when he lived in Virginia. But really for a long time, this collection has sat in storage in boxes. And eventually he sold the collection. It wound up being acquired by first one group, and then another group acquired it, and then finally some folks in Columbus acquired the old museum collection. And that's when Stephen from the Buckland Museum, the curator, heard about this collection that had so much historical impact on one of the fastest growing religions in America, neo-pagan Wicca. The guy's not even pagan, but he thought, this is a collection that needs to be displayed.
Right.
And actually the guy who runs the Buckland Museum, his day job is he runs the House from A Christmas Story, which is also in Cleveland. He calls it the leg lamp house is what he calls it. But yeah, that's his regular gig. He does the Buckland Museum on the side. They have regular store hours 3 days a week. Let me take a look and see, do they have, oh no, they kept this flexible. They didn't put the times on here. But they've got the bucklandmuseum.org website. They've got their phone number, their address on here for now. Definitely, if you're ever going through Tremont, if they're not open when you're coming through, give them a call. He'll do appointments. It's just fascinating to go through there.
Fairly consistent Friday nights, about 5 till 8 or 9.
Yeah.
And Saturdays noon till maybe 5.
Yeah.
And then otherwise, sometimes it's Monday nights, and it's changed to other nights at times.
Right. Yeah. So go to bucklandmuseum.org. It'll have all the latest.
Right.
As to exactly when the regular being open hours are. But it's awesomely cool. I was there last week. I was fanboying out over stuff because he was pulling out stuff that wasn't part of the regular display collection. I was just looking, going, oh my God, this is one of Ray's unpublished occult novels. I mean, literally handwritten on a yellow legal pad. Ray kicked it old school when it came to his fiction writing. There was another one that had been done, you could tell, on an electric typewriter. Remember typewriters?
Oh, yeah.
I used to have an electric typewriter back in the early 90s.
Right.
But getting back with Ray's life, after he did the tree, he wound up running the CX Wicca Seminary for several years, where you could learn more and deeper, get more deeper instruction in how to be a CX Wiccan through his correspondence course that he had, and he ran that for years.
Right, I think it was one of the best that I'm aware of.
Oh, it was a great correspondence course. I've got to look through some of it before, and it was just very logically laid out. As a matter of fact, he used the CX Wicca correspondence course as the basic outline for the Big Blue Book. And as a matter of fact, when you talk about other things, I mean, Ray Buckland started writing about witchcraft. Most of your original classic witchcraft or Wiccan writers always had that first book that they put out where they wouldn't admit that they were a witch themselves, but they talk about these really interesting people that they've run across, and they're called witches. And I mean, Doreen's first book, Where Witchcraft Lives, was written as I found these really cool people and they let me write a book about them. Here it is, isn't it cool? Even though she had co-written the goddamn Gardnerian Book of Shadows, and yet Doreen's first book was still with that attitude. Well, Ray started off with that. He published a couple of books like that, and he would also arrange to have reporters come and talk to his coven and maybe see some rituals, as long as they agreed not to publish his identity and use his craft name of Robat, and his wife's name is Lady Rowan. But then eventually one local journalist decided fuck it and published their names and their home address and a photograph of the outside of their house. So they were outed. And after that, Raymond Buckland was very public. He wound up doing things like, he was on the Tom Snyder Show, on the Tomorrow Show. He went on the Merv Griffin Show. He went all... as a matter of fact, if you look at a lot of books written about witches from the 70s, late 60s and early 70s, there's one of two groups that the photos were taken of, either Alexander's coven in England or Ray Buckland's coven in the United States. He did a lot of important publicity work, and just really blazed a trail. There's so much that Long Island coven did when Ray and Rosemary were running it. Like, for example, there's one thing that a lot of covens these days will have what's known as an outer court, especially covens that have any sort of initiatory system or any sort of mystery tradition. They'll have what's known as an outer court. And what it is it's a way of them getting to know you, getting to basically train you on basic, like how to do magic, how to cast a circle. Nothing that's part of the tradition that's oath-bound or any secrets you might have, but basically how to meditate. There are people who come to these outer courts at all levels of experience. Well, the first outer court was invented in Ray and Rosemary Buckland's Long Island coven. It was never part of British witchcraft. As a matter of fact, the British Gardnerian covens, the way that you became a Gardnerian is you hung out with some of them and you talked to them, and if they liked you, they would initiate you, and then you'd learn on the job how to do all this stuff after you were initiated witch. And Ray and Rosemary's coven kept that same practice too, but then just a few too many times they'd get someone who'd come in and they'd get initiated, and somehow they'd find a way to copy a bunch of the Book of Shadows, and they'd run away and then come out like 6 months later claiming to have been initiated by their grandmother when they were 12 years old. This ancient family tradition. And yet it was just stuff that was stolen from Ray and Rosemary Buckland's coven, their Gardnerian coven. And after that happened one too many times, Ray Buckland and one of the most important members of that original coven, a guy named Ed Fitch, who later wound up doing Magical Rites from the Crystal Well, one of the foundational books of modern eclectic paganism. Ed Fitch and Ray Buckland sat down and thought, how can we stop people from doing this? They came out with the outer courts. And they came out with a basic group of rituals that were not oath-bound Gardnerian, but could give people the flavor of what Wiccan ritual was like. And those materials later wound up getting swapped around as the Pagan Way material. And for those of you who aren't too up on your pagan history, for a long time, when you consider that Gardnerian Wicca to spread meant you had to join a coven, work at it for a few years, and then hive, and then you could have your own coven, but you're still geographically close to the old coven. The British traditional Wicca coven spread very slowly. And yet there were people who were reading these books by people like Gerald Gardner and Dorian Valiente and then Ray Buckland, and they'd see the TV shows where people were being interviewed, and they thought, wow, this is cool, I want to do it. But there are no covens around me. And so the Pagan Way material was used for years. It would be like photocopied and mailed to friends, and just be like, here's some basic rituals, get together with your friends and start doing them. And it was the beginning of do-it-yourself Wicca and paganism in the US. And this stuff again, flowed out of the British traditional Wiccan coven the Gardnerian coven in Long Island. So, you know, when you take a look at things, yes, for a long time, a lot of modern Wicca in the United States really was guided and affected by the earliest Gardnerians, either directly or indirectly, through the pagan way material. But yeah, there was just so many things, again. The threefold law being a law. The original Gardnerian covens never really had a threefold law. They didn't. I mean, they would talk about karma. They would talk about getting back from the universe what you send forth. But it was a real general thing, you know? It's kind of like the law of attraction. Like attracts like. The basis of sympathetic magic. So the idea is that if you're just a bitter, angry person, then you're going to attract bitter, angry stuff. But they never put a number value on it. They never put they never like came up with the idea of some sort of cosmic accountant in the sky, figuring the exact karmic cost of 3 times whatever it is that you did for good or bad. And then that also talks about absolute truth and absolute value judgments. You know, I mean, because that's
rules. Is it Half Price Tuesdays?
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, BTW traditions tend not to really hold forth on a threefold law, and yet almost every eclectic path really holds this threefold law to be this super important thing. Well, the first person to, I mean, the Wiccan Rede was announced by Doreen Valiente, but the threefold law was something that Ray Buckland came up with backstage in a New York TV station because he had gotten word from somebody who was sympathetic on the staff that the host was going to try to ambush him with this question of, well, you guys don't believe in hell, so what's to keep you in line from just doing all this bad stuff and, you know, without the fear of punishment in hell. And so Ray was just trying to figure out, what the hell am I going to tell this guy? And
he would grasp.
Yeah, and so he just thought, well, people had already started talking about the idea of a threefold return. Ray didn't pull that number out of his ass, but it was by no means a settled thing until Ray Buckland went on television and said, oh, well, you don't have to worry about that because witches believe in a threefold law of return. Whatever we do for good or for bad comes back to us 3 times. And holy motherfucking shit did people run with that. I mean, you will go into Facebook Wiccan groups to this day who will tell people, if you don't believe in the threefold law, you're not Wiccan. It's like, really? Because the guy who came up with the word Wicca to go along with this form of witchcraft, Gerald Gardner, didn't believe in a threefold law, and I think he was Wiccan. But yeah, that's another thing, you know, that again, it was just people. A lot of the earlier people, like Ray Buckland and Selena Fox, and these early people, and Laurie Cabot, who just passed a few days ago, unfortunately, these people, there were no guides on how to interact with the media. When these folks like Ray, were trailblazers, they didn't even have the benefit of hindsight. Like, I can look back and see, I have an old Jane Pratt TV show from a Lifetime TV talk show where they had the subject was about modern witches, and Todd Allen was on there. Todd, who built that stage over there, Todd was on there, and he was suffering because he was on stage with some of the flakiest people that I've seen on any of these shows. And I've seen witches on the Vicki Lawrence show. But some of these people, and Todd was just like, oh my God. The look on his face was, get me out of here. Although he did get to play Lord of the Dance with Bongo Bob.
You should ask him about that when you see him.
I will have to ask him about that. He's here. He's usually down at Cafeteria at the lunchtime show.
Sound.
But no, so, you know, nowadays, those of us who interact with the media, we can look back and see, well, when so-and-so did this, they did that, and ooh, that didn't work out too well. So I'll avoid that. And these early trailblazers, they didn't have any hindsight. They were just kind of flying by the seat of their pants. So I don't think Ray intended to invent something that would become dogma for the Facebook generation, but it just kind of works out that way. Now, when Ray moved out of Long Island, he moved to Virginia, and then he wound up migrated across the country until he made it to California. And in California, since he had done so much media of being a witch, when he first got to California, one of the things he did to keep himself with a roof over his head was he was a consultant to Hollywood movie studios when they would do anything occult related at all. Like sometimes he would get like calls from studios saying, hey, we'd like you to come in and look at this stuff our art department put in this scene. And you can tell us if, is it real? Will it offend anybody? Or is it something that they saw in a Hammer horror film and they're just copying? So he would do that a lot. As a matter of fact, one of the things in the Buckland collection that I haven't got to see yet, the one thing that's not on display yet, is a letter to Raymond Buckland from William Friedkin, the writer of The Exorcist. The director of The Exorcist. William Peter Blatty wrote The Exorcist. William Friedkin directed it. And Ray worked with him on several projects. I mean, William Friedkin would send him scripts and say, how real is this? Because for a while, William Friedkin was really wanting to make a realistic occult movie. And so, but he wasn't a writer. So he would send Ray scripts and say, how real is this? Is this real? Is this bullshit? I don't think they ever found a script that was like non-bullshit enough for William Friedkin. But there's a very cool letter in the Buckland collection from William Friedkin. And he worked trying to do stuff like that for a long time. He would write for some pulp houses. I think Scott Cunningham got Ray a gig doing some pulp paperbacks. Just, things that you could pump out in a couple of weeks and would pay you a few $100s. As a matter of fact, most of Scott Cunningham's books were never published under his own name. They were published under other names because they were cheesy one-off pulp westerns. And I'm not sure how many books of Ray's wound up being like that. Later, Ray would turn to writing fiction. And he wrote some very cool fiction. The Bram Stoker mysteries is a particular favorite. Those are really cool. He spent some time out in California. While he was out there, he became one of the top writers for Llewellyn Worldwide. And in 1987, he published what would probably become his most well-known book, one of the most well-known books in modern pagan publishing, a book called Buckland's Complete Book of Witchcraft. This large blue affair that people have come to call Uncle Bucky's Big Blue Book. And yes, I heard Raymond Buckland call it that himself at a talk in Kent. When he's like, I published what some have called Uncle Bucky's Big Blue Book.
Right. And he was at some of the early Starwoods too.
Yes, Ray was at some of the earliest Starwoods because that's, what you wanted to be where the action was at pagan-wise back in those days. Back in like 81, 82, 83. But he wound up putting out Buckland's Complete Book of Witchcraft, in many ways modeled off of his old CX Wicca Seminary correspondence course. It's still a great overall overview for a first book. I warn people that there are things in there that I've known hundreds of people who've read that book. I've yet to find anybody who decided to forge their own Athame. Even though he goes into quite good detail about how good of an idea this is, and it's really not that hard. Nobody I know has ever forged their own Athame. And I've known people who've done rituals right out of Ray Buckland's book. When I was starting off as a young witchling, that was actually the first book I ever read on modern Wicca. Back the year it came out in 1987. I was 16. I found a copy in my local public library. I wound up going to a local head shop that had a used copy for sale, and I bought it there. I still have it. First night I ever met Ray Buckland, I got him to sign it. Although I waited until I had my book. I was in the men's room, waiting to use a urinal. Ray comes out of the men's room stall, just says, "That's a good book," and goes and washes his hands. I waited until we were out in the hallway to ask him to sign it. Which was a good call on my point, because Ray was very, very British. And had a very keen sense of decorum. Not a very egotistical man. You had to really draw him out to get him to talk to you. But once you got him to talk, if you found a subject that he was really into, then he could talk your ear off. I would always tell people, ask him about his gypsy heritage. Always a
Yeah.
good way of getting the man to open up. But Buckland's Complete Book of Witchcraft, I mean, it has chapter by chapter. It's arranged like lessons. It has test questions at the end of each chapter. It has answers to the test questions in the back of the book. It's got recommended reading, and let me tell you, the recommended reading in Buckland's Complete Book of Witchcraft did more for my Wiccan career than anything else. Because the Big Blue got me into Wicca and gave me some of the earliest rituals that I tried pulling off. But it was when the book in the recommended reading where he was like, go read Gerald Gardner, go read Doreen Valiente, go read these people. I did. I went off and found these books and started reading them. And it's so funny because I started practicing Wicca in 1987, which was also the year that Cunningham's Wicca, A Guide for the Solitary Practitioner came out. And it's weird for someone who got into things at the dawning of the solitary eclectic age. My earliest books were all by old line witches. Ray Buckland, Laurie Cabot, Leo Martello, Gerald Gardner. And part of that was because of Buckland's book, pointing me in different directions. I stumbled across Leo Martello's book in the same head shop where I bought the Buckland book. That's a weird place to go for your third book on Wicca. But anyway.
Well, you'd be surprised. Prince of Patchouli has that, has, you know, the pagan stuff as well as the head shop.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I knew other places like that in other parts of the country. So,
as a matter of fact, at the time that the Big Blue book was so popular, late 80s, early 90s, Llewellyn was trying to expand into doing home video. And they put out 2. Herb Magic featuring Scott Cunningham and Witchcraft Yesterday and Today by Raymond Buckland. 2 of their most popular authors at the time, 2 fairly legendary authors, both of which who have crossed beyond the veil. You can find both videos on YouTube, by the way. But I got the original VHS of the Buckland video. I have it in its original hard case. I got it signed. It was kind of cool. They later came out with it on DVD. And the cool thing is that when you watch the DVD, all the behind the scenes stuff was all shot by Scott Cunningham. See, that's what people don't realize, is that during the era when Big Blue and Solitary Practitioner were coming out, they were all hanging out together. They were all Wiccans in Southern California. You know, they were just all part of the same social scene. So it's kind of interesting to see how many times the history intersects. If you take a look at the video, during the ritual scenes that Ray Buckland is in, he's wearing these long purple robes. And it's the same long purple robes that they have on display at the Buckland Museum. And it's really cool. And I asked Stephen why they chose those particular robes. He said not only were they in the Witchcraft Yesterday and Today video, but also there's a movie called The Love Witch. And if you haven't seen it, I recommend it. But, hello. If you haven't seen it, I recommend it. There's a scene, it's set in the Wicca scene of New York in the early 1970s. And they have a character in there who was dressed, and his hair and beard, they were copying Ray Buckland. They were literally copying, they had a Ray Buckland clone in the movie. They dressed the guy up so his hair and his beard were even just like Ray's in 1973. Okay, so that was another reason why they chose those purple robes, because the movie The Love Witch reproduced those purple robes right down to the stitch. It's kind of funny. Yet another way that Ray was influential. And Ray published just so many books. I mean, he published, not only Big Blue and The Tree, but he published books on practical candle burning rituals and color magic and cord magic and, gypsy fortune telling and just all these different things. The guy he knew his stuff. Yeah. I mean, he really studied this stuff well. He always took it very seriously, that you never stop learning. You never stop expanding your knowledge base. I mean, again, here's the guy who brought witchcraft to the modern Wicca to the U.S. Most people could have coasted on that the rest of their lives, especially with how popular that all forms of Wicca have become. And you can trace all of it either through lineage or through inspiration back to that first Long Island coven. But he just kept going and just kept learning and just kept expanding on his stuff. After a while, you know, Ray wound up getting married for the 3rd time to his wife, Tara. Tara's from Cleveland. So when they decided to move out of Southern California because it was just too fucking expensive to live there, they decided to move back to Ohio because she's like, look, we can get land. You can have a landing strip for your ultralights. That's one thing Ray liked to do, is he liked to fly ultralights, which basically looks like a lawn chair with a lawnmower engine and a propeller and big wings. And you go up and fly it like a crazy person. You know, something that, you know, some people put together these things with duct tape and they fly them. Ray was really into ultralights, and he needed a place where he could have a landing strip. So he wound up moving down to Amish country.
Right.
He was actually a member of the Worcester UU. The Worcester, well, they don't have a Cups chapter. They have a UU pagan. They have a Worcester pagan group there that they call Whoops instead of Cups because they're the Worcester Unitarian Universalist Pagan Association or Society or whatever. And Ray used to be, you know, peripherally involved with that for a while. But once he moved back to Ohio, he kind of went into semi-retirement. He didn't write so many nonfiction books anymore. He wound up putting out a few more nonfiction books in his lifetime. One book that he'd originally written as Doors to Other Worlds, which is a book about spirit communication, later got revised and expanded into Ray's Big Red Book, which is the complete book of spirit communication. That's another one. That has a 7-pointed. That is a septagram on the cover of it. But really, after he came back to Ohio, he focused on trying to become the novelist he always wanted to be. He started off doing The Committee and Cardinal Sin for Llewellyn. He later expanded into the Bram Stoker mysteries. Towards the end of his life, he just did novels. He did mostly novels. As a matter of fact, another thing I got to take a look at was, like I said, one of his unpublished novel manuscripts. They had the first 3 chapters at the museum, and it was called Crossing Swords with Satan.
Right.
I mean, he liked Victorian pop boilers.
Yeah.
That's the kind of stuff he grew up reading, so that's the kind of stuff he was writing. Was like Victorian pop boilers.
Right.
Like Gerald Gardner meets H.P. Lovecraft. I mean, that kind of vibe. Not that dark, but that kind of vibe.
Yeah. He also tried his hand in stand-up comedy.
He also did stand-up comedy. Go on YouTube and look up Raymond Buckland stand-up comedy, and he would go and do open mic nights and do stand-up comedy. He also, other things he did, he was an avid jazz aficionado, and he used to play a lot of Dixieland jazz. He taught himself how to play the trombone, and he also learned how to play the banjo. And towards the end of his life, he formed a little Dixieland jazz combo and wound up playing around his local area, going to coffee shops. You never know. If you walked into a Worcester coffee shop on open mic night, you could see Ray Buckland and his buddies there doing a little Dixieland jazz with Ray on a banjo. And let me tell you, when you first see Ray Buckland strumming a banjo, it's kind of like a paradigm shift, but it's kind of cool after that. As a matter of fact, there's this really cool, if you put Raymond Buckland into a YouTube search, within the first 20 links, there's a little 15-minute documentary on Ray's life. They have video of Ray playing banjo with a guy and singing with a guy who was playing the guitar and singing along with him. It's kind of cool. And eventually Ray went back to his first love. When he was 12, he was brought into the occult through a spiritualist seance. And then he got back into spirit communication and spiritualism later in life. He was a regular at Lilydale, the spiritualist gated community in Pennsylvania. He was a regular reader at Lilydale over and over and over again. That was always my secret plan to get him to come back out to a Starwood, was to ask him to do spirit communication for pagans or spiritualism for occultists, because you can always get him to talk about spiritualism and seances. But his health started failing over the last few years. He had a heart attack, wound up having to be life flighted to a hospital, recovered from that, but eventually had fluid in his lungs, had chest pains, and his heart just kind of gave out in September of last year.
His last public appearance.
His last public appearance was at the opening of the Buckland Museum in Cleveland, Ohio. And as a matter of fact, if you look up a YouTube channel called Cute Witch, one word, cute witch. She has a great video story along with some great photographs of the opening of the museum, and the little 15-minute biography I was talking about before that has Ray playing the banjo, that has video of him cutting the ribbon, which we didn't get to see because we got there late. But him cutting the ribbon on the actual museum.
Right, I recorded, also put it up on Facebook where it disappeared after being, posted. I have to reload it up on YouTube, sometime.
Oh yeah. Let me see how we're doing.
I wouldn't be surprised if they have some type of activity or event at Lilydale, because I know that was someplace.
They already had a memorial for him.
Did they?
Already. Yeah, they did. They had a memorial for him there in December, I think.
Maybe they'll have continued conversations with him.
You never know. It's funny too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's so.
But it's not unprecedented. I mean, Alex
Spent a lot
Sanders.
of time there.
My mother-in-law's from there, and I've got pictures of Lily.
Yeah.
Start over again. I missed the beginning.
Well, Larry recorded it.
Yeah, Larry recorded it. I was about to say, I can't remember what I'm going to say. Actually, Alex Sanders, the founder of the Alexandrian tradition, one of the people in his current coven, the coven that would have been his if he had still been alive, the coven directly descended from his own, has been talking to Alex through a Ouija board for the past 10 years. Jamal DeFiosa, the guy's on my Facebook friends list. He's actually a really nice guy. But him and Sharon Day have seances all the time where they talk to Alex Sanders. But if we can talk to Alex, we might as well try to talk to Ray. I think that would be a cool thing. I think maybe this Samhain, which is another famous person in pop culture, Hugh Hefner. Mm-hmm. And Ray Buckland died the same day. And Ian and I were wondering, I wonder which one of the two of them have seen more women naked in their lifetime. Of course, I was mentioning that to Oberon. He's like, well, they're both gone. I'm still here. Maybe I can catch up. But anyway. But I definitely, again, I've got some cards here for the Buckland Museum. Anybody wants one, feel free to take one. Also, shameless plug real quick before I open things up to questions, because we've got about 15 minutes left. My name is Taliesin. I have written a novel. Unlike other books you see people hawking here, this isn't a how to be a witch type thing. This is a novel. This is a romantic story. It is my first published novel. I've got it for sale here. It's $10, and online it costs $13 because I'm a self-published author, and paper and ink costs money. But on Amazon it costs $13 plus shipping, unless you're a Prime member. If you're a Prime member, you get free 2-day shipping. But you can get it here from me for $10. And as a matter of fact, Thorn Mooney, who's also at Starwood giving workshops, I put her in the novel. She helped me with some information on, because this is set in a fictional Gardnerian coven, and she's a third-degree Gardnerian priestess, so I was picking her brain for things. And I decided, well, what the hell, since I'm going to put her in the acknowledgments, I'll go ahead and put her in the novel, too. The sequel to this is going to be set at Starwood. Sweet. So, and I'm actually going to put actual vendors. I've already got Oberon's permission to put him in the novel. Right. I'm going to get some of the vendors to give me permission to put their booths in my novel, so that people who read the book and then come here could be like, oh my god, it's just like how he wrote it. And that's what I do here. Like my movie Dark of Moon, I'm doing realistic stuff. There's no levitation, no lightning bolts out of the fingertips. It's a realistic representation of what the real Wiccan pagan community is like. I recommend checking this out if you like romance. So that's there. And actually, coming up very soon, I'm going to be publishing an ebook pamphlet called How to Find a Healthy Coven/Teacher, because now that I can get into my old laptop where it's at, I can actually access it again. I had sent this to Ray Buckland a few years ago, and he read it and he really thought I should put it out. I never got a chance to actually publish it. Now I'm going to do it as a 99-cent ebook, because it's not super long. But I've got Ray's very nice quote about it that he told me I could use. And I've also got Isaac's Cult Danger Evaluation frame in there that I got Isaac's permission. That shows you how long ago I wrote.
Permission to use it.
I got Isaac's permission to use that. So that's going to be coming out soon as well. Check out Taliesin Govannon. Put it into Amazon. Go to taliesing.com. You can find out info about me there, and about how to buy my book and how to buy my movie, Dark of Moon. which has people like Ian Corrigan and his lovely wife Leopold, and Steph Gooch is in it, and folks like AJ Gooch and Bruce Flores, who are no longer with us, were in the film too. So if you like movies with lots of swearing and jokes and paganism, check it. It's like Clerks in the Cover.
It's the most realistic, entirely realistic depiction of what it's really like.
Yes.
I've never found its equivalent as far as realism in terms of magic and the way things really are in the community.
And I do that with the novel too. I try to make it very, very realistic. Any questions though about Ray Buckland? We've got about 10 minutes left. Any questions about Ray's life, work, anything you've heard about him, read about him?
What's the story? What can you expand on his experience in the coven he connected up with when he was in Virginia?
Well,
and then in Atlanta for a while.
Yeah,
Working
he
with
was
Atlanta.
in Virginia, then he was in Atlanta for a while.
Especially Atlanta, let's say.
He floated for a while. He wound up circling with other groups, other covens. People for a while tried to accuse him of having started the Georgian Wiccan line that came out of Georgia, because he did spend some time in Atlanta. And people are saying, oh, well, he violated his oath to listen to his high priestess. And no, he didn't start the Georgian Wiccan line. Actually, another thing that happened is that some other people from the U.S. wound up flying out to England and getting their own initiations, not from Gerald Gardner, because Gardner died just about 6 months after Ray Buckland and Rosemary were initiated. But they would go over there and they would get initiated by Eleanor Bone. Or Patricia Crowther, or one of these people, and then they'd come back to the U.S. and they'd start their own Gardnerian covens, having the full authority to do so. After a while, Theos, and especially Theos, not so much Phoenix. I think Phoenix just kind of went along with things to keep his wife from making his life miserable. But Theos would always accuse these other Gardnerian lines of being fraudulent because she's like, I've got the only one. It's like, no. Other people did what your upline priest and priestess did and went to England and got fucking initiated is what they did. It's funny, Ray lived in California forever. He has no connection to the California line of Gardnerians that grew up entirely independently of Ray Buckland. I mean, he always honored his initiatory oaths. When he said he wasn't going to reveal something, he didn't reveal anything. He did his big blue book without revealing any oathbound Gardnerian stuff. He did the tree without revealing any oathbound stuff. So he really always did honor those commitments. He was just a very creative man and could find ways around it, like hooking up with covens and, doing things like, well, maybe you might want to consider doing it this way. Maybe this will work better. And he would never say whether it was something he had gotten from Gardner or not. Hopefully the next time I go up there, he said next time I go up there, I might be able to get into some of the correspondence. At the Buckland Museum, they've got the letters from Gardner, which I'm a pagan history geek. I just want to be like, ooh, I want to look, I gotta see. I was fanboying out the whole time last week. I was like, oh, you've got this. But my daughter, I think, was a little embarrassed. But anyway, she was there. She's like, you should have seen your face, Dad. But yeah, that's the thing. He would meet up with covens, and he was the last thing he did ritually with pagans was the Whoops chapter. He always loved doing ritual, and he did a lot of solitary stuff. But he would always hook up with these local covens, and some of which had very interesting pedigrees. To this day, if you talk to someone from the Long Island line, they either love Ray or hate Ray, and none of them ever met him. It was all what their priests or priestesses upline told them about. So,
boy, do they ever have supercharged, heavy-duty adherence to the idea of lineage.
Oh,
they fight over that.
They fight over that, and yet when you realize it, lineage is a thing because mystery traditions are initiatory; they are lineage.
Right.
Just the thing is that it's one thing to proclaim your own lineage. To be able to say, I was initiated by this person, who was initiated by that person, who was initiated by that person, who goes back to Gerald Gardner, that's cool. But when people start being like, oh wow, you need to be reinitiated because you weren't initiated right. It's like,
Right.
you know what? Fuck you very much.
I'm initiating myself. I'm good.
I mean, ultimately, I'm part of a Gardnerian offshoot, and I'll tell you that really, the initiatory experience is something that the gods and the spirits give us.
Right.
Now, when you're initiated in a coven, it's kind of like putting that signpost out on the astral saying, "Hit me," because you'll get the initiatory experiences. Sometimes you'll get them in ways that leave you going, "What can I have the number of the train that hit me?" So initiation with a group is certainly valuable, but also you can gain the initiatory experience yourself by doing the work, having the dedication, making the connections with the gods and the spirits, and eventually somebody, a god, a goddess, a nature spirit, somebody's gonna have some time to kill and decide, guess what, let's initiate this person. They're not really fucking like that. But anyway, it can screw it up for a short time, but really my initiation experience has ultimately been very positive. But ultimately it's the gods and the spirits that initiate. A well-trained coven can kick that process into high gear.
Right.
And a lot of people have been initiated when their initiator said, I think you've already been initiated by the gods, but I'll put you through the ritual so these other people will acknowledge you. Or I'm going to do a ritual to acknowledge that which the gods have already deemed as done. That happens a lot, but really the initiatory experience it's an internal one. I mean, that's the whole point of mystery traditions, is to have your own personal internal experience. And two people who go through the same rite will most likely not have the same experience. And that's part of it, but that's also part of the reason for pre-initiation secrecy. It's not, ooh, we've got a secret, you don't know, we're better than you. Well, okay, Theos might be like that, but we're talking evolved people. I hope she never sees this video. Anyway, she's still alive. Anyway, but the thing is that no, really the reason for pre-initiation secrecy is that when you're going through an initiation, if you're someone like me, a lot of my mode is think, analyze, think. And when you think and analyze too much, you're not in the moment.
Right.
You're not experiencing things in the moment. And so the initiatory experience that you could be having, that mystery experience you could be having, you're going to miss it because you're thinking about it too much. Well, guess what? If you don't know what's going to go on in the fucking ritual, then you can't overthink it, can ya? You just
Exactly.
it's the old tradition's ways of forcing you to be in the moment, to be here now, experiencing this for what it is when you're going through that initiation. So I would recommend, even if you set up a pagan group with some friends sometime, if you guys decide you want to do some sort of rite of passage, don't tell the other people. Make them experience it firsthand. Don't give them any clues. And if you're going to be in a group of people, you got to trust them. So if they don't trust you to write a ritual that's not going to hurt them without them having to know about it, maybe you shouldn't circle it. It's just one of those things. Well, if we don't have any other questions, I will say thank you for coming. This is my last workshop of the festival, but I'm going to be on the radio from 4 to 6 tonight and a couple hours tomorrow. And thanks for coming, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.